So, in your opinion, do you think that everyone has a right to privacy?
I do. I think everyone has a right to privacy. I think that we pretty much, is it a legal right? The legal status of a right to privacy is very complicated and differs across jurisdictions. We're not going to use the language of rights, but there's stronger privacy protections in Canada than there is in the US. There are much stronger privacy protections in the EU than there are in Canada. We have embedded in our Constitution certain rights vis-a-vis government surveillance, and we have embedded in other laws certain responsibilities of corporate actors with respect to personal information. Those include the responsibility for notice and the requirement for consent. So the language of rights is language. Do I think we need privacy? Do I think we ought to have privacy? Do I think that we need our privacy protected? Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that.
So, how do you think a right to privacy would be enforced?
Oh, that's a very, very, very complicated issue. We do have a Privacy Commissioner of Canada and privacy commissioners in the provinces who focus on privacy vis-a-vis commercial actors and will, for example, as Privacy Commissioner of Canada did, accept complaints from Canadians and adjudicate them with respect to the behavior of commercial actors, and sometimes censure and place responsibilities on those commercial actors, consistent with fair information privacy principles, basically, or fair information practice principles. With respect to the government, there are other sorts of regulatory frameworks and other kinds of actions that are available to us. So I think those two, we kind of have measures or approaches in place in those two domains. That being said, enforcing a right to privacy is pretty complicated.
Maybe even absolutely impossible in the sense of because then you might need total surveillance and then.
Well, it depends. It depends on what you mean. I mean, you raised the right to be forgotten. It's really interesting. If you look at the right to be forgotten as it plays out in the EU, it's not what you might think it is. Because what it is a very limited right, as I understand it, for someone to go to a particular actor, usually a search engine, and say, you must remove information that is identifiably about me. But there's so much information out there that's not identifiable about you, and it doesn't cover behavioral tracking information or the kind of information you were talking about that might be incorporated into data sets over which we run machine learning algorithms. It turns out that under the EU regulations, that probably doesn't even enter into the consideration. And yet, I want it to be protected. So we don't have mechanisms yet.
So what we also have to consider is the intersection of healthcare information with information that's voluntarily given
Yes.
up. Usually you have the boundaries. Often when people perceive healthcare information, it's usually within the context of healthcare only. But a lot of people, before they decide to go to the hospital, they will usually Google their symptoms.
Yes.
They'll see what's happening.
Yep.
They'll try to do some
Yep.
self-judgment. And some of them will post on forums.
Yep.
They think they're anonymous, possibly if they just use a dummy username, but it still a set of geographical information can identify them. So do you think when people do this, are they losing the rights or the protections they have under existing regulations?
I think that any special protections that accrue to health information, I think they've lost them. And I think it's because I don't know how you draw a clean line. If I search about CPAP machines, is that different from searching about sleep apnea? Is that different from searching about being unable to sleep? Is that different from searching about a new mattress? Mm-hmm. I don't know that you can say there's a point at which this becomes health information at which it doesn't. That's why if you take healthcare system information, it is clear that is collected by a certain set of people, organized in a particular set in a particular set of ways. It has there may not be a a clean boundary, but you know what fits in there. I think it's going to be very hard to extend any special protections to health information about our health that we reveal in the context of our everyday online activities outside of a professional healthcare context. That being said, it'd be worth looking at that case that the Privacy Commissioner of Canada adjudicated on, and their position was that Google was using highly personal information and sensitive, I think that is actually a word that they use, sensitive information on which to target advertisements, and it was the sensitivity of the information that they believed ought to be protected, so that Google shouldn't be allowed to use sensitive information, not health information, sensitive information.
How do you define sensitive
Well, that's the thing. I don't know. It becomes a matter of there's no category. It's like the problem, I started off talking a little bit about this, the problem about what's identifying information is actually really hard to figure out. And it sort of melts into the problem about what's information about me. And you've alluded to the idea of re-identification, so you can strip the identifiers out of a set of data, but if you leave enough in there, you can re-identify that data down to the individual level almost. So if you strip the identifiers out, is it personal information? Well, if it's re-identifiable, I guess it is. The idea of what's sensitive and what isn't sensitive, it's almost like you have to test it on a case-by-case basis.
Do you think the Canadian or even provincial education system, is it doing enough to educate the next generations on the information they post, the information they have?
I think we're doing a reasonable amount. I think there is a general feeling among people, this attitude of they're not interested in me, I'm safe, they're not interested in me, the government's not interested in me, and with respect to commercial actors, it kind of goes a little bit differently. It goes, I won't really care. My 18-year-old son basically would rather get targeted advertisements than non-targeted advertisements because it's less boring. I think people think that the information can be used to achieve a good end for them. So they are not so concerned with privacy protections. Maybe we have to sensitize people to the possible negative consequences. Voter manipulation and Cambridge Analytica brought that to the forefront. The idea of price discrimination and other kinds of discrimination. And I think we have to do a very good job of getting people to understand the integration of data that's occurring, and I think increasingly the power of the predictive analytics over the integrated data sets. And there's good data that says that highly sensitive personal characteristics can be predicted with incredibly good accuracy on the basis of information that you think is, it doesn't reveal much about me at all. I'm not worried about it. And that I think we do need to better educate public on.
We touched on the right to be forgotten earlier, and as we had discussed a bit, in machine learning algorithms, people's information lingers around even after they've requested a deletion of their information. Do you think it'd be reasonable to have an extension that absolutely any information gathered by a user should be deleted, even if it's aggregated over the user's information?
So I think you have to look at what seems right and what's practical. I'm not a lawyer. I know for a long time I've had sort of consumer end concerns about data that gets aggregated. Long before we were talking about machine learning algorithms, I started thinking about things like, often in medical magazines or medical journals, there will be a little case study thing. And the identifiers will be stripped out of it, but it'll describe a particular case and how the case was resolved. I remember thinking about those going, if that was my case, I don't have a right to say you can't publish that. And I'm probably not even asked if I can publish it. And it doesn't feel right to me, but I actually have no ownership of that information. It turns out that the clinician can do that without my consent. So we have precedent for people being able to use de-identified information without the consent of the individual who owns it. There's actually in Canada, a similar case about pharmacist records, and can pharmacists strip identifiers out of the prescription records and sell those? And I don't remember what happened with that case, but I remember thinking about that. It bothered me a lot. So it becomes very difficult if you think about all kinds of data drawn together, aggregated into a machine learning data set with the explicit identifiers stripped out of it. How would you find and remove, think about it, an individual's data? You have to leave the identifiers in there, but if you leave the identifiers in there, the risks may be higher than not. I think where we have to intervene is on the collection side. I think that's where options of choice need to come in. I think that's where our education has to be targeted, and I think that's actually where legislation must focus its force, is on, can you collect this stuff? Can you collect it? Can you store it? Given the identified uses, can you keep it?